Hola, bona tarda. Benvinguts tots a l'Ateneu. Gràcies per venir en aquest primer acte que faig com a ponent de la secció després de ser escollit a l'octubre com a nou ponent de la secció d'Estudis Polítics. I ho estarem en un acte, crec que és de primer nivell, amb dos referents del pensament liberal i del capitalisme global al món i a Europa. I per això, gràcies a aquest acte, ha estat gràcies, evidentment, amb l'Ateneu, però també amb la col·laboració amb el col·lectiu Catalans Lliures, amb la Fundació Llibertat i Democràcia, l'Institut Juan de Mariana, l'editorial Deusto i Students for Liberty Barcelona. Abans de presentar-vos els dos ponents que tenim aquí, sí que m'agradaria que el representant de Deusto i de Catalans Lliures pugessin un moment a l'escenari i es presentessin i us poguessin adreçar unes paraules. O sigui que sí, Eric, i voleu pujar tu també?
Bé, bon vespre. Realment això fa molt goig. Em sembla que puc dir que parlo en nom de Catalans Lliures. És realment un orgull tenir aquests dos cracs, aquests dos economistes de molt nivell, membres destacats, com ha dit el Sasha, de les idees liberals a escala europea. I per nosaltres ens ha costat realment fer aquest acte, però ho hem aconseguit i aquest és el premi, un premi molt gratificant perquè omplir aquesta sala sempre és un goig. Jo seré brevíssim perquè l'important és el que vindrà després. Simplement jo us vull dir que els Catalans Lliures és un think tank nascut el 2016, fruit de la convicció d'un grup de membres de la societat civil per introduir el discurs i les propostes liberals en l'articulació del nou model de país. Som un pol independent i no partidista de coneixement, debat i generació d'idees, compromès amb el pensament profund i rigorós i amb vocació d'incidir de manera determinant en l'opinió pública i les institucions catalanes. L'activitat de Catalans Lliures té tres pilars fonamentals: investigació, divulgació i influència sobre el disseny de les polítiques públiques. Estem portant a terme aquest cicle que nosaltres hem titulat En llibertat, i en definitiva és un cicle que compta amb un total de 8 sessions que van d'octubre a abril i que pretén ser una via de participació i influència en el debat social, un pont entre el món acadèmic, la societat civil i els gestors públics per unir esforços en vista a contribuir al progrés de la societat catalana. Tractem temes molt diversos: regulació econòmica, educació, innovació i transferència tecnològica, fiscalitat, globalització, immigració, etc. I ho farem amb ponents de renom nacional i internacional com els que avui ens acompanyen. Avui tractarem el tema de la globalització i del progrés al qual la humanitat, gràcies al lliure mercat, pot evolucionar endavant i amb més benestar. Sembla que ho hagin fet expressament, però no. És molt oportuna aquesta conferència que fem avui, justament amb l'estudi que han tret Oxfam, no sé si aquesta setmana, i la veritat és que avui almenys a Barcelona, a Catalunya, podrem sentir una altra visió, una altra teoria sobre la desigualtat al món. I en aquest sentit, molt probablement una bona part de la ciutadania creu que la pobresa mundial i les desigualtats globals augmenten i les oportunitats minven. Res més lluny de la realitat, el progrés que la humanitat ha experimentat en les últimes dècades no té precedents històrics. En els darrers 25 anys ha sortit tanta gent de la pobresa, es calcula uns 3.300 milions de persones, com en tota la nostra història prèvia al 1990. Aquesta evolució va associada a una gran millora en els registres de mortalitat infantil, alfabetització, accés a l'aigua potable o allargament de l'esperança de vida, quelcom contrasta amb la visió marcadament pessimista. Tot això contrasta amb aquesta visió pessimista, com deia, que Oxfam ens ha publicat aquests dies, que manté una gran part de la població occidental. I això ho demostra de manera detallada i ben documentada aquest llibre que avui també ens ve a presentar el senyor Norberg, gràcies a Edicions Deusto, aquest llibre sobre el progrés i el lliure mercat. Bé, us deixo precisament de Deusto. Sí, Roger.
Doncs moltes gràcies, bona tarda a tothom. Res, des de Deusto i en nom del grup Planeta també m'agradaria només simplement donar les gràcies a tots vosaltres per acompanyar-nos avui aquí, donar les gràcies també a Catalans Lliures per haver fet possible la presentació i aquest acte aquesta tarda aquí a l'Ateneu sobretot, per invitar-nos a celebrar aquí la presentació i també evidentment al Juan Ramon Rallo per acompanyar-nos avui i com no el Johan Norberg. Johan, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. El llibre es publica a una col·lecció nova que hem fet conjuntament amb el Juan de Mariana. De fet, va ser una idea del Juan Ramon Rallo, aquí present, que un dia va proposar fer una col·lecció perquè hi ha sempre una sèrie de textos que sempre ens agradaria, o sempre hem pensat que ens hagués agradat publicar, però pel tamany del mercat dels llibres de no ficció a Espanya a vegades es fa complicat. Es fa complicat perquè potser no tens suficient recorregut comercial. Però vam pensar que si entre tots fèiem un esforç, doncs segurament podríem publicar aquest tipus de llibres i un esforç que fem no només amb el Juan de Mariana, sinó també amb Cobas, que és la gestora del senyor Francisco García Paramés, que segurament molts o tots vosaltres coneixereu. La idea és una col·lecció on es publiquen una sèrie de textos de filosofia política i que d'alguna manera crec i creiem, entre tots els que formem part de la col·lecció, que donen una visió diferent a la que generalment tenim. De fet, el llibre que avui presentem, el llibre del Johan Norberg, és precisament això. És un llibre que podríem dir que és l'antídot perfecte per tots aquells que diuen que el món és molt pitjor avui que temps enrere. En realitat el que diu el Norberg i el que ens explica el Norberg és que no és així. És a dir, que ara estem en el millor moment de la humanitat i per demostrar-ho ens explica una sèrie de dades, totes profusament documentades, per què en aquests moments estem vivint la millor era de la humanitat. En aquest sentit ens explica que, per exemple, en el capítol de desnutrició, des del 2045 al 2015, el percentatge de la població en estat de desnutrició ha baixat d'un 50% a un 10%, que l'esperança de vida ha pujat significativament. Per exemple, el 1900 l'esperança de vida de mitja era d'uns 30 anys i el 1950 era de 50 anys. Ara, el 2015, és ja de 71 anys. Així, amb una sèrie de qüestions, pobresa, violència, qüestions mediambientals, alfabetització, llibertat, etc. Realment hi ha una dada que és també curiosa, és que, per exemple, Karl Marx, quan escrivia El Capital, Karl Marx pensava que el capitalisme era un joc de suma zero, perquè el que guanyés algú havia de perdre. En realitat, si un es fixa en les dades, veu que entre el 1818, que és la data de naixement de Karl Marx, i el 1883, quan va morir, l'anglès mitjà havia multiplicat, durant aquests anys, havia multiplicat per 3 la seva riquesa. És a dir, no només ara estem millor que abans, sinó inclús en aquell moment estàvem millor. Finalment, a mode de resum, és un llibre que ens explica que els pilars bàsics del desenvolupament econòmic són la llibertat individual, per suposat, l'apertura econòmica i el progrés tecnològic. I que sense això no hi ha millora. Són aquests 3 pilars el que ens permeten, com deia abans, que avui hagi sigut un dia una mica millor que ahir i que demà sigui o serà un dia millor que avui. Res més, moltes gràcies i disfruteu de la xerrada.
Gràcies, Roger, gràcies, Eric. Jo ja us passo a presentar els ponents que tenim avui, que són els realment importants. I en primer lloc tenim el Johan Norberg, que és historiador econòmic, és escriptor i promotor del capitalisme global, la immigració i les societats obertes. Va estudiar a la Universitat d'Estocolm, on va obtenir un MA especialitzat en un estudi de la història de les idees. També va ser acadèmic titular del think tank suec Timbro, des del que sempre ha advocat per la globalització i les reformes liberalitzadores. Una tasca que ara també realitza des del Center for the New Europe i el prestigiós Cato Institute, un important think tank dels Estats Units, i també és membre del Consell de la Societat Montpellerin de Suïssa. És autor del llibre En defensa del capitalisme global i publicat per Unió Editorial el 2005, hi ha doncs, també amb Deusto el llibre Progrés, del que avui ens parla. I gràcies també a la col·laboració de l'Institut Juan de Mariana. Fou productor també del documental per la tele Globalization is Good, emès pel Channel 4 britànic, i el 2005 també el seu blog va ser votat com el millor de Suècia pels lectors d'Internet World. I també per acompanyar el Norberg tenim a Juan Ramon Rallo. Ell és doctor en Economia per la Universitat Rei Juan Carlos de Madrid i llicenciat en Dret per la Universitat de València. És professor al Centre d'Estudis OMA, a ICEAD i a la Universitat Catòlica d'Àvila. És director de l'Institut Juan de Mariana i analista econòmic de Ràdio, La Sexta Noche i El Rojo Vivo, que és segurament per on la gran majoria de vosaltres l'heu conegut. També col·labora habitualment amb el Confidencial i La Razón i ha escrit un gran volum de llibres. Els darrers són Una revolució liberal per Espanya, Contra la renta bàsica i La pizarra de Juan Ramon Rallo. I ara sí, jo ja callo y dono la palabra al Juan Ramon perquè comenci la conferència.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias desde luego a Catalans Lliures por organizar esta, creo, esencial conferencia aquí en Barcelona con Johan Norberg. Muchas gracias a Deusto, a Value School y bueno, aunque lo estoy representando, no está de más también agradecerle al Instituto Juan de Mariana por la publicación del libro y desde luego muchas gracias a todos vosotros por asistir y por regalarnos una parte de vuestro tiempo para intercambiar ideas. Yo simplemente quiero actuar, como no podía ser de otra manera, de prologuista, como lo he hecho en el libro de la conferencia de Johan Norberg. Johan ha publicado dos grandes, ha publicado más, pero quizá sus dos títulos más importantes a lo largo de su trayectoria sean En defensa del capitalismo global y Progreso. Y me gustaría establecer un vínculo entre las dos obras que les separan 15 años, alrededor de 20 años ya, alrededor de 20 años, al menos de la edición en castellano, entre los dos libros. Es decir, el mundo ha progresado muchísimo en el último medio siglo y más en particular en los últimos 25 años. Luego, el propio Johan Norberg os esbozará y os resumirá los principales indicadores de ese progreso sostenido e ininterrumpido en una, ya digo, gran cantidad de indicadores: esperanza de vida, pobreza, salubridad, alfabetización, violencia, igualdad de derechos, igualdad incluso económica. Pero no solo hay que constatar, no solo hay que levantar acta de ese progreso histórico que hemos experimentado en el mundo. Yo siempre suelo decir, y ya se ha comentado, que este año sería el mejor año para haber nacido en toda la historia de la humanidad. Si uno tuviese que elegir un año a ciegas para nacer en cualquier otro momento actual o pasado, debería elegir por prudencia hoy, porque maximizaría sus posibilidades de vivir bien frente a cualquier otra época pasada. Pero quiero ligar la situación en la que nos encontramos hoy con el marco institucional que ha hecho posible que vivamos y disfrutemos de este enorme progreso. Y ese marco lo pronostica, de hecho, diría yo, si no lo lee, el libro de 1998, el primer libro de Johan Norberg, En defensa del capitalismo global. Cuando el movimiento antiglobalización le estaba acusando de defender los intereses de las oligarquías y de los ricos, cuando cargaba contra Johan Norberg por haber publicado un libro al servicio de las élites económicas, lo que estaba era constatando cuál era el marco institucional que iba a permitir durante los siguientes 20 años que millones, decenas, centenares de millones de personas abandonaran la extrema pobreza. Y ese marco, insisto, es la globalización, es el capitalismo liberal. Porque es el capitalismo, es la globalización, lo que ha permitido incorporar a millones, centenares de millones de personas a lo que los economistas, quizá con algo de tecnicismo, llaman la división global del trabajo. Lo que ha posibilitado que las personas no solo trabajen para subsistir, sino que trabajen para cooperar, para generar riqueza para los demás, y al generar riqueza para los demás, para enriquecerse ellos mismos, es la globalización, es el libre comercio, es la posibilidad de producir en una parte del mundo y vender en la otra parte del mundo sin trabas gubernamentales de por medio. Son esas trabas las que impidieron que durante décadas una parte de la población mundial se incorporara al proceso globalizador y por tanto escapara de la pobreza. Fueron las élites políticas, occidentales, pero también de los países en vías de desarrollo, las que oprimieron con marcos institucionales extractivos a esas sociedades y les impidieron levantar cabeza para salir de la pobreza, como nosotros salimos a partir de la revolución industrial. Hoy no es que todas estas lacras se hayan solucionado, ni mucho menos, pero en la medida en que se ha reducido su influencia, hemos conseguido unos resultados espectaculares. Y querría que reflexionáramos entre todos cuáles serían los resultados si hubiésemos levantado completamente el pie que oprime a estas sociedades y que las impide terminar de incorporarse a ese proceso globalizador. Si miramos la evidencia, lo que vemos es que la globalización produce crecimiento económico. Aquellos países que durante las últimas décadas más se abrieron al libre comercio global, consiguieron crecer 1,5 puntos del PIB por año más que aquellos países que se cerraron al comercio global. Y el crecimiento, también nos lo indica la evidencia, a lo que conduce es a una mejoría de la calidad de vida no solo de los ricos, sino también de los más pobres. Si analizamos uno de los estudios que más impacto ha tenido al respecto, que es el de Dollar y Cray, lo que observamos es que a largo plazo la renta per cápita de los más pobres de una sociedad tiende a crecer al mismo ritmo que el crecimiento agregado de esa sociedad. Por tanto, potenciando el crecimiento de las sociedades, en última instancia terminamos también potenciando el crecimiento y la mejoría de la calidad de vida de los más desfavorecidos. El vínculo es firme, es claro. Más globalización, más libertad económica global, es más crecimiento, y más crecimiento es mejor calidad de vida para las personas de renta más baja. Y no es casualidad que los dos grandes enemigos de la libertad económica y por tanto los dos grandes enemigos de la capacidad de autorrealización del ser humano, de su autonomía, de respetarle su autonomía, de tolerar su autonomía para desarrollar su propio plan de vida, esos dos enemigos que hoy, quizá un poco vulgarmente, pero para entendernos, se llaman populismo de izquierdas y populismo de derechas, no es casualidad que los dos tengan un enemigo común. Tienen pocos enemigos comunes, pero un enemigo común que tienen es sin duda la globalización. El populismo de izquierdas, al proponer un crecimiento exorbitado del Estado, un control absoluto de la sociedad a través del sistema impositivo y regulatorio para supuestamente favorecer a los pobres cuando lo único que hace es multiplicar su número, evidentemente es un enemigo de la globalización. El populismo de izquierdas, los partidos de extrema izquierda, las formaciones políticas de extrema izquierda quieren poner en vereda la globalización, se oponen a la globalización. Pero el populismo de derechas, el nacionalismo, mercantilismo económico, la idea de que nos están robando desde fuera los puestos de trabajo, están atacando nuestra comunidad primigenia y por tanto hay que respetar al ciudadano local y no ponerle a competir con el extranjero, oponerse al inmigrante, oponerse a la llegada de nuevos bienes fabricados en otras partes del mundo, ese populismo de derechas que ha estado representado claramente por Donald Trump en Estados Unidos, al menos a un nivel retórico bastante evidente, es también enemigo de la globalización. Por tanto, los enemigos de la libertad económica, que son aquellas formaciones políticas que se oponen de frente a esa capacidad de organización del ser humano, a la libertad individual, son también enemigos de la globalización y por tanto son, en definitiva, enemigos del progreso. Que no os engañen diciendo que se preocupan o por el trabajador autóctono o por el pobre africano. No se preocupan en absoluto. De lo único de lo que se preocupan es de imponer su concepción de la sociedad a todas las personas y de, por tanto, impedirle que esas personas puedan cooperar a escala global con otros ciudadanos a los que a lo mejor no conocerán nunca, pero con los que sí tienen la posibilidad de beneficiarse mutuamente. Y eso es, en definitiva, la globalización. Cooperación a gran escala para escapar entre todos de la pobreza y para vivir entre todos mejor. Y la globalización trae progreso, y un progreso que Johan Norberg nos podrá explicar maravillosamente como lo ha hecho ya a lo largo de su libro.
Thank you so much for those nice introductions. I'm sure they were. And for inviting me here and for being part of this event and for publishing my book. It's a great event for me in so many ways. Partly it's great to be back in Barcelona I've been here a couple of times before, and I think I have to share the story that proved to me how wonderful, how beautiful this city is. A few years ago, I was here with my 5-year-old son. He was 5 years old at the time. And we showed him everything. We showed him Sagrada Familia, we showed him La Rambla, the beaches, all the other Gaudi architectural pieces and so on. And he went, but all the sort of everywhere, majestic things. And then we took the bus to the hotel, and then suddenly he said, "Wow, Daddy, look, a car wash." Which told me that I like to read this story as saying that there's something to look at everywhere. There's something of interest to everybody. And also perhaps that we shouldn't forget the tiny miracles of everyday lives, the things that we take for granted, but we rarely think about all the accomplishment, all the innovation, all the entrepreneurship, and all the hard work that it took to create things like a car wash as well. I'm here a little bit to try to cheer you up. I don't know if you need it, but anyway, that's the purpose of my book, to talk about the world and to talk about those everyday miracles that add up after a while. Apparently, according to a recent study, a third of all respondents in Spain said that it was probably better 50 years ago. Around a third was nostalgic. And that actually shows that more people here are optimists than in other places. In France, 46% thought it was better 50 years ago. In Italy, 50% thought it was better 50 years ago. In Venezuela, 80% thought it was better 50 years ago, but they probably have a point. But it is easy to long for the good old days, to think that with all the problems that we have in our world, there must have been some point in time when life wasn't this hectic, so full of problems, so full of difficulties, strife and conflict. And because that's what we see, right? We see it in everything. We see it in our modern technology and how it's changing how we're behaving, how it makes us stressed out, and how it's really changing our way of thinking. I read a newspaper article in the New York Times recently which said that scientists have now concluded that American life is moving too fast. Speed is fatal to ideas and reflection and real progress. It creates quantity but not quality. It's the day of the fleeting vision, but there is no concentration anywhere. There is no quiet reflection anymore. And we can all sympathize with that, right? It's just one thing. This article wasn't published this week or this month. This was published in October 1923. Because in 1923, they were worried in the US and in Europe as well about the speed of modern technology, how the radio, how recorded music began to change our way of behaving and making us more stressed. The car changed culture, destroyed old traditions, and created a youth culture where the young could just drive away and do whatever they wanted. We have always thought in every period that there was some good old days, and that's what they thought in the 1920s. They were longing for the 1890s. That's what they thought better. There was an American writer, Jason Pfeiffer, who found this story, and it made him interested in when was these good old days? When was this wonderful period when everything was fine and we didn't have the problems of the day? And he went to a Donald Trump rally asking Donald Trump supporters, so if you want to make America great again, when was America great? What's the past era that you're longing for? And they came up with a consensus or a near consensus in the 1950s. But then Jason Pfeiffer asked the historians who have specialized in the 1950s about what people in the 1950s thought about the 1950s and what they said in the newspaper articles and in the broadcasts in the 1950s. And they said that now we live in an awful era, full of problems and conflicts and tensions and the threat of immediate nuclear annihilation. It used to be so much better back in the 1920s. But in the 1920s, of course, they had these problems with modern technology and they longed for the 1890s. But when they read the stories from the 1890s, it wasn't the period when people thought that now we've finally solved the problems. No, on the contrary, they said that this is a unique problem-filled era, and especially modern technology, the railway, the destruction of old jobs in agriculture changes our way of behaving and thinking and so on. And it created a new disease called neurasthenia. And neurasthenia was a combination of, well, you're basically stressed out. It showed up in headaches, in backaches. It could turn out to be impotence. It could be chronic diarrhea, all sorts of problems, and of course depression. So they longed for the period before the Civil War in America, because things must have been much better then. But they were longing for the founding era in the 1770s instead. But in the 1770s, they made that revolution and founded the United States of America because they thought that this was the worst era ever with oppression, so we have to make a revolution. And Jason Pfeiffer continued back in history, back and further back, all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago. Because it didn't take too long a time after mankind invented the written language, because before they started writing stories about how now we live in an awful era, full of problems and strife and conflicts. It used to be so much better, because nowadays the kids, they don't respect the adults, the politicians are corrupt, and the businessmen are ripping us off. So basically, mankind has always been nostalgic. We've always thought that now is a difficult era, and there must have been some ancient past where everything was so much better. Partly because we know that we survived those problems, even though we know that they faced all sorts of difficulties, much bigger than we might be facing today. We know that we survived, but we never know if we're going to survive the problems that we have right now. I care about this quite a lot because I used to be a nostalgic myself. I used to think that there were some good old days in the past. I wish that I had been born 150 years before when I grew up, because now we only had environmental destruction and horrors and inequality and the rapid pace of life. But that was before I studied history. And when I studied history and saw under which circumstances my ancestors lived in 150 years ago, I had to ask myself, where would I have been in that era? And the answer is that I wouldn't have been anywhere, because life expectancy in Sweden back then was 30 years. I would have been dead. And if that's the case, I had to reevaluate a lot of things. I couldn't trust my gut instinct, my feeling that it's so difficult now, it must have been better in some previous era. I had to study the data, and that's what we all have to do. We have to look at the statistics, we have to look at the long trends, because if we only trust our feelings, we will always come to the conclusion that now it's worse than it's been before. So that's what the book is about. That's what Progress is about. That's why I present 10 reasons to look forward to the future, because it is about different indicators of human well-being that have been radically transformed over the last 200 years in Europe and North America, but it's been changing at an accelerating pace in the last 20, 30 years or so. We have to look at those things, because otherwise we will always suffocate in the immediate breaking news phase, which will always be some sort of dramatic problem, an instance of suffering. And if you're interested in all the 10 reasons to look forward to the future, you're going to have to read the book, because I can't go through all of them. But I'll give you 2, which I think summarizes a lot of the development that has taken place while we thought of other things, while we worried that the world was going to the dogs. And it's one economic indicator and one health indicator. It's poverty and it is life expectancy. If we continue to make progress in those areas, then at least we have done something right in the world. In 200 years ago, the average poverty rate around the world was 90%. It means that according to our ways of measuring extreme poverty, basically sustaining on less than $1.9 a day, adjusted for local prices and purchasing power. Economic historians say that was around 90% 200 years ago, which means that even in Spain, even in Sweden, the majority of people lived in extreme poverty back in the day. Average wealth level, income levels were less than in sub-Saharan Africa today. Then we had the Industrial Revolution, which began to change these things in Europe and North America. And by the turn of the last century, extreme poverty was almost eradicated in the industrialized world. Now we are seeing the same thing happening around the world with the advent of globalization, of more open markets, better communication, transport technologies around the world, which is, in a way, a much bigger transformation than the Industrial Revolution ever was, at least if we talk about quantities, number of people and the number of lives being affected. The Industrial Revolution was some 200 million people who saw their average income doubling in 50 years. And that was amazing. It was the greatest poverty reduction the world had ever seen. But now, 2 billion people have done the same thing, not in 50 years, but in slightly more than 10 years. Which means that 10 times as many people in a fifth of the time. 10 times 5 is 50. Globalization, in a way, is 50 times bigger than the Industrial Revolution. So it's not strange that it creates tensions and changes on an enormous scale if it's 50 times bigger than the Industrial Revolution. And in these last 25 years, we've seen the greatest changes. Since then, extreme poverty has been reduced from around 37% to less than 9% around the world in extreme poverty. Which means that for the first time in world history, the absolute number of extremely poor has declined as well. Because in all previous eras, even though poverty, the share might have declined in certain areas, the population growth was so big that the number of poor increased. But now in the last 25 years, we've seen a reduction in extreme poverty, the number of people in extreme poverty, by 1.25 billion people, even though world population grew by 2 billion people, which means that every minute that we talk about the world, every minute that we complain about the world, another 100 people rise out of extreme poverty. That's the greatest thing that the world has ever seen. And one aspect of that is inequality, because it doesn't happen at the same pace in every area. We used to have more equality in lots of countries 25 years ago and 35 years ago. In a country like China, it was much more equal 30 years ago, because at that time they were equally poor. At that time, 90% of the Chinese population lived in extreme poverty. Since then, they've been given more economic freedoms. They've been able to create bigger supply chains, trade with the rest of the world, start new companies, and so on. And now around 10% of the Chinese live in extreme poverty. But at the same time, it hasn't happened at the same pace everywhere. The coastal areas, the coastal regions, and the cities have grown much, much faster, and that creates inequality. But if you hate poverty more than you hate wealth, that's a major positive transformation of the world. And hopefully more people by the minute will experience the same thing. Well, 100 people actually do every minute. So that's what happens when it comes to extreme poverty around the world. Now let's look at life expectancy. If that continues to increase, then we're doing something right with lots of different things. When it comes to access to nutrition, to safe water, to health care, and to education. And that is the case. 100 years ago, the average life expectancy around the world was 31 years. Just 31 years. So all of you who are older than 31 should sort of praise this magic century when so much has happened. Now, average life expectancy around the world is 71 years. So basically, nothing really happened for 100,000 years when it comes to human life expectancy. And then suddenly, in 100 years, it expanded from 30 to 70 years. This is because of these developments, everything from better access to food supplies, the Proportion of people in chronic undernourishment has declined from 50% to 10% over the last 60 years. We've seen basic things like sewers, filtrated water that gives people access to safer water. We've seen the advent of incredible innovations in healthcare, in drugs, the discovery of antibiotics and other things that makes for a longer life for more people everywhere where they are open to these developments, to these innovations. I recently read 2 different stories in the same magazine, which highlights the changes that we've gone through when it comes to healthcare over the last 200 years. The first one was a story about a Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. The other story was about a George, 10-year-old. The first one, on the great composer. It turned out that the research team had looked into all the data, and they had now concluded that Mozart, the greatest composer of his time, probably died from a sore throat. He had some problems with his throat. He went to the doctor, and they said, yeah, there's something wrong with your throat, so you're going to die, basically, because that's how you died 200 years ago, even if you were the greatest composer, even if you were the emperor or the king. 200 years later, same magazine telling the story about healthcare today, about George, 10-year-old. He suffered from a brain tumor. But now doctors can do something about that. So he underwent surgery, went into the brain, took out the tumor, but it was a difficult operation, so George's heart stopped beating during the operation. But they managed to revive him and get the tumor out and get him back to health. And as the story was, when I read the story, he was quickly going back to his former self in great rude health. And that's amazing in itself. But it gets even more amazing when you realize that George is not a human being. George is a goldfish. A goldfish in a tiny aquarium with a family who thought that they didn't want to see George die. So they went to the doctors and fixed it. So the goldfish today and the pets today get better treatment than the greatest composers and kings got 200 years ago. That's the changes that we've gone through over these 200 years when it comes to healthcare. And that's why life expectancy in no country around the world was higher than 40 years 200 years ago. Not a single country, not even the richest ones. Today, there's not a single country where life expectancy is shorter than 40 years, not even the poorest ones. And it goes back and forth in various countries, in various places, in various populations. And in certain countries like the US, United States, right now, we see a tiny backlash by 0.1 year because of the opioid epidemic. And those things happen. We see those backlashes in places where they make a mess out of things. But overall, it is increasing around the world at a fascinating pace. In the country that leads the pack, and it's usually New Zealand or Japan, life expectancy has increased by 3 months every year over the last 150 years. And it keeps on doing it, and the rest of us follow along after a little while. So, which means that when you listen to me for 1 hour, your life expectancy has increased so that you haven't approached death by an hour. I won't take 1 hour out of your life, only 45 minutes. So I hope it's worth it. Life expectancy doesn't increase that fast in countries where it's already high because we've managed to deal with child mortality and infant mortality. And that's the major change. If you save the life of a 5-year-old, she gets 60 years. 70 years of extra life expectancy. But it increases at the old age as well. But most dramatically in the countries that are now making the fastest progress against child mortality, especially a few countries in Africa, like Kenya, like Rwanda, like Ethiopia, like Botswana. They've managed to do something extraordinary. Over the last 10 years, they increased life expectancy in their population by 10 years, which sounds impossible. It sounds like no one died over these last 10 years. but it means that they've made the fastest progress ever that any countries have ever done when it comes to dealing with child mortality and issues like that. And those extra years that we get are fairly good years as well. As the new medical journal Lancet recently put it in a meta-review of all the data, present evidence suggests that people are not only living longer than they did previously, but also they are living longer with less disability and fewer functional limitations than before. So that's what has happened around the world in the last 200 years and in the last minute that you listened to me. Another 100 people were lifted out of extreme poverty, and life expectancy was increased by another 15 seconds during that minute. Now, why is that? What explains these changes around the world? Well, definitely growth and the fact that we see more purchasing power, and then we can also buy all the things that we need. Well, lower poverty, obviously, but also better health and things like that. But even in places where they haven't made any economic progress in the last 50 years, there are a few countries like that, like Haiti. Haiti is not richer today than 60 years ago. And yet, life expectancy in Haiti is 21 years longer than it was then. Child mortality has declined by 3/4 since then. So it's not just individual decisions in individual places. It's the fact that somewhere we saw innovations. Some places we saw new discoveries, new knowledge. And in this era of globalization, those things have spread around the world faster than ever before. Because it's so incredibly difficult to find new antibiotics or invent the internet. But once someone has done that, if you are fairly open and allow new technologies and new ideas and new business models, then it's fairly easy to use them in other places. So I would say that what is progress? I've looked through all the scientific literature to find out what progress is really about. And the best definition, I think, I found in Robert R. Heinlein's writings, the science fiction author, where he said that progress is not done by the hard workers, by those who stay up late at night and work tremendously long hours. It's done by the late risers and the lazy people who are looking for easier way to do the old things. And I think that's exactly, it's a smart definition of what it's about. Not of just working longer hours, but doing smarter things during those hours. Finding the innovations and the knowledge and the business models that put our work to the best use. And therefore we need the new technologies and the new ideas that do that. So I'm thinking of 3 freedoms that can explain this progress that the world is witnessing. The freedom to explore new knowledge, to explore science, strange things, things that people hesitate to look through, even though it might challenge traditions, taboos, even though it challenges special interests. The freedom to explore this new knowledge and science. And then the freedom to experiment with it, with new technologies and new business models, even though it might hurt vested interests and incumbents. And then the freedom to exchange the results of this across borders, across regions, across nations, to be able to share this knowledge, technology, the goods and services that have taken place, the freedom to trade, the freedom to invest across borders so that those ideas are being transmitted to new places, the freedom to explore, experiment, and exchange. Unfortunately, and this is why I do not just bring good news and making you relax about world events. The bad news is that those 3 freedoms are the most controversial freedoms on the planet right now. And these are exactly the freedoms that are being challenged by the populists and the authoritarians of the left and of the right, because they want to protect the old solutions. They want to protect the old taboos. They want to protect the old incumbents, the old businesses, and the old jobs and other things. And they get some help when people despair about the world, when people think that the world is falling apart, when they are afraid. Then they have a tendency to go to those individuals and to those populists and authoritarians who say that they are going to protect them against these awful changes. And one of the reasons why they do that is that few people know that this development has taken place. This is an untold story in so many ways. If you ask most people about what is happening in the world, they do not realize that this has happened. One story, when I published this book originally, I published a chart that showed what has happened to 4 different indicators of living standards around the world. Life expectancy, no, not life expectancy. It was chronic undernourishment, it was poverty, it was child mortality, and it was illiteracy. And they had all declined by around half or more in the last 25 years. I thought this was the killer chart that would sort of convince everybody that the world is making rapid progress. But one of the first things that happened after I published this on Twitter was that a British woman retweeted me with her own interpretation of the chart. She told all her followers that this is a terrible, horrible, shocking graphic that confirmed my general sense that the world is going to hell in a handcart, because she had read the graph upside down. And I think that this is part of the problem with the world today. People read all the charts upside down. And I don't mean to make fun of her, because she was not alone in doing this. Lots of people did. And because that is the case. When you hear about something that is so totally opposed to all the senses that you've been given, or the gut feeling that you've been given about how the world is falling apart, well, then you read the chart in the way that confirms this sense. She's not alone. 5% of the British, according to a recent poll, think that the world as a whole is going in the right direction. 5%, which means that more people think that the moon landing was fake than believe in human progress. More people believe in ghosts and astrology than believe in human progress. The Americans are more optimistic as usual, so 6% thought that the world as a whole was improving. And one of the reasons is that they have no idea about this data, about the world. When you ask them questions, more knowledge-related questions, because this first question could be interpreted in any way, it could be like your general sense. But if you ask Europeans, what do you think has happened to poverty over the last 25 years around the world? Do you think it has doubled, been cut in half, or stayed around the same? Only around 10% say accurately that it was cut in half. Only around 10%. And actually it's more than half, it's by 3/4. But it was a couple of years ago that we had this poll. And it's quite shocking in so many ways. Not just that people have missed this, it's not general ignorance, because a random question, a random answer would have given a correct answer more often. As the professor of international health, Hans Rosling, often put it, chimpanzees are better than humans in answering questions about what has happened to the world in the last 30 years. Because a chimpanzee, if he was given the question, what has happened to poverty? And then you write down the 3 answers on 3 different bananas. The chimpanzee would pick the right banana at least 1/3 of the time. But human beings don't. We pick the right banana 1/10 of the time. So it's not just ignorance. It must be, because if we're ignorant, then we pick the random answer. It must be that we're misinformed, that we've been given the wrong conclusions from misguided or outdated data, statistics, for some reason. And I think there is such an instance, because I asked this woman who retweeted me with her interpretation of the chart, why did you get the impression that everything that was good in the world 25 years ago has been cut in half? Where did you get that sense, do you think? And she said, I do follow the news quite closely. I pay close attention to the evening news. And I only hear a message about death, despair, conflict, crime, and hunger. So I couldn't possibly believe in this data, even though it comes from the United Nations and the World Bank and OECD and all those institutions. And that's the way the media works, right? No news is good news. If it bleeds, it leads. If it's dramatic, if it's shocking, if it's threatening, that's something we pay close attention to. The risk of dying from a natural disaster has declined by 90% over the last 100 years. But no one notices this because that has never made the news. But there is always a natural disaster somewhere, a flood or a hurricane or something, and people are dying. And then obviously that will top the news cycle everywhere. Crime rates have declined quite dramatically in Western Europe and the United States in the last 30 years. But no one notices. In the United States, actually, during the period when it declined the fastest, over those 25 years, people said every year, except one in polls, that crime is probably rising. And I think, ironically, the year when they thought it didn't rise was the only one when it did rise a little bit. And that's the way the media works, right? It tells us the shocking thing. And especially in an era with global news, when we can hear things instantly from around the world, then homicide rates might decline by half. But that doesn't matter, because there's always a serial killer with an axe on the loose somewhere. And then that's the most shocking thing, and then that will top the news cycle everywhere, and people will get the impression that this is what is going on everywhere in the world all the time. I won't blame journalists too much, because I am one in many instances, and and I talked to a lot of journalist friends, and they say that, yeah, but what would you have us do? We know exactly what you pay attention to. We can study it in real time. And you might tell us that you want some good news about the world for a change, but you don't. You want to read about the serial murderer. You want to read about the shocking things. And I think that's quite true. So it's not the media. It's you. It's me. It's us. It's human nature. We're probably genetically programmed to whine and complain about the world and be constantly shocked by everything that is happening. Because historically, and in the hundreds of thousands of years when our genetic predisposition was created, paying too much attention to a risk wasn't a problem. Paying too little attention to risks was, because it was probably a threat to your survival. The hunter-gatherers who just thought, let's just relax tonight and have a ball, they were probably eaten by a predator or killed by another tribe or faced a storm that they didn't foresee. Whereas those who constantly were worried, looking to the horizon for new threats, they survived, they passed their genes on to us, and they pass their stress hormones onto us, so that we constantly, somewhere in our reptilian brain, reacts much more strongly to bad news than to good news. Somewhere in our reptilian brains, we think it's a threat to our survival, and therefore we must pay more attention to it. Psychologists have documented this and have this saying that bad is stronger than good. We always pay more attention to losing money than to gaining money. We pay more attention to and remembering when we lost a friend than when we gained a friend. We pay more attention to and we remember bad news more than we remember good news, because historically that's how we survived. In a much safer circumstance, in a much safer environment, when we live lives of sort of 70, 80 years long, all the bad news we hear is probably not a threat to our survival. And especially not in a world where we can hear bad news from anywhere, from the other side of the planet. But we still react in basically the same way. And what has happened in the last few years is that this genetic programming basically has met global media, and it has met social media. So suddenly there's someone everywhere covering anything that goes wrong. Human suffering is not new, but the cell phone camera is new. So now there's always someone there documenting in real time everything that goes wrong around the world. And we can all follow it in real time, and we share it with our friends if it is sufficiently threatening and sufficiently awful. And that's why we tell ourselves horror stories constantly about what is happening in the world, more horror stories than we used to do. And I mean, I share this tendency. I wake up every morning, check my cell phone, and conclude that the world is falling apart. Because that's the news I'm seeing. I never see the trend lines. I never see the context. I never see the long story about what has happened to the specific factor that I'm reading about. I'm only just shocked and stressed out by this particular item of bad news. And I think, and this is my conclusion, that this is dangerous because pessimism is politically potent. Frightened people do not act in the same way as people who have a longer-term view of things. Frightened people make more panicked decisions, and they don't think long-term, they don't invest long-term. They want some sort of immediate solution straight away that will take care of all the problems. And I think this is one of the reasons why we've seen the rise of more authoritarian and populist groups around Europe and in the United States in the last few years, because people are frightened. For various reasons, and there are some very real reasons to do that, but also because they don't see all the progress that is being made all the time, constantly. And they think that the world is going to the dogs, that everything is dangerous, and if that happens, well, then you react by wanting an immediate solution. You want to shut the rest of the world out. You want immediate protection. You want to shut the competition out or the immigrants out, or you want some sort of strong man in charge who tells you that I will protect you, I will take care of you from all these dangerous freedoms that is threatening you constantly. And here's the paradox, because the only thing to fear is fear itself, because it manifests itself in this fear of the very freedoms that has made this progress possible, that has turned this into the era when people lead the longest lives, in the best health, in the most safety, with the longest education, and in the most wealth that mankind has ever had. And we know that this isn't automatic. It doesn't happen by itself. It's dependent on this freedom. It's dependent on this openness. We've seen again and again historically how this has been ruined, how this has been destroyed, how things have gone into reverse, how we've seen backlashes against openness, against globalization, against trade, against foreigners. And the problem is that that has often been the result of fear. But the result has always been decline, stagnation, or even collapse. So we have to be a little bit fearful as well. We have to recognize the immense progress that the world is making all the time. But we have to understand that sometimes in various periods it can be a bit fragile if there is no one there to talk about this progress and the pillars that are absolutely essential for it to continue. The freedom to explore, the freedom to experiment, and the freedom to exchange. These are the things that need constant explaining again and again, because they are counterintuitive, and sometimes it's the other message is a bit more tempting. So I actually wrote a book on progress and how important it is not to send the message that we should just all relax and do something else. I wrote it because I'm a little bit afraid that this kind of golden era that we could create, if we allow for these forces of creativity, of innovation, and of trade, this golden era that doesn't give us immediate results immediately that we can point to, because they work on a longer time scale, but create these long trends that add up. You've never read a story about how child mortality declined by another 0.25% over the last week or so. But add it up, week after week after week. That's the difference between a life expectancy of 30 years and a life expectancy of 70 years. We rarely think about the wealth that is being created every day by entrepreneurs, by innovators, by traders. But if we add it up over 100 years, that's the difference between 50% in extreme poverty and 10% of the world population in extreme poverty. So that's what we have to explain constantly, that the only thing that we really have to fear is the kind of fear that would shut down this openness and these freedoms. because fear can become a self-fulfilling prophecy that blocks all these things. So therefore, let me end this talk, the introduction, with a quote from another science fiction author, Douglas Adams, who told us how we have to look at the future if we want to create the best future. We have to believe in the future to invest in it. And if we invest in it, that's the only way to make it better. So therefore, Douglas Adams concluded, the ideas we have about our future formulate the way we move forward to it. So it's very important that we have a most positive view of what the future could be like. That way, we're forced to look at where we actually want to go, not at where we're frightened that we might end up. Thank you.
Bueno, crec que tenim temps de fer un parell de preguntes si entra el públic. Per tant, qui tingui dubtes, preguntes, qualsevol cosa a comentar, pot aixecar la mà i li donem micròfon. A dalt també. A dalt veig una.
Millor que baixi la persona? Millor que baixi? Pot baixar?
Bueno, són dues persones a dalt.
Però és pel micro.
Podeu baixar? És pel micròfon.
But there's no rush. No rush, because every minute that we wait, another 100 people rise out of poverty. So. And you only approach death by 45 seconds.
Okay, so I wanted to ask if you have seen that showing these data to people who are pessimists actually does change their mind. And if it does, about the state of the world, does it change their mind about how we continue this progress on? Because I can imagine a very sophisticated social democrat saying, okay, yeah, sure, markets do create wealth, but it's because the state then takes taxes and provides public services that we see all of this progress. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I mean, if people didn't change their mind in any way, it would be pretty pointless what I'm doing, so I hope they do. But actually, one reaction that sometimes happens when you tell people about their sort of favorite problem in the world, and you tell them that, you know, that is actually being solved right now, is that they become depressed and kind of sad about it, because so many of the things that we worry about are part of our identity. And if we sort of dealt with it, it's sort of, so who am I now, and what am I going to do next in that case? And there's a Swedish author, Lasse Berg, whom I'm very inspired by, who used to be a pessimist, traveled to Asia in the 1970s and explained how awful everything were and how everything would collapse pretty soon. And then went back 30 years later and realizing that in almost every village, life has become massively improved. And he changed his mind on both how the world has changed and on his politics. He used to be a communist, and now he's a free market liberal. But that doesn't happen to everybody. But he actually told me the story about how often when he talks about the world, and he talks about sort of poverty is declining and hunger is declining, and he can see how the audience is going more and more miserable, sort of, because they're so heavily invested in the problems. But then he tells them, oh, but there are things to worry about, like global warming. That's a major problem and it's going to be difficult to solve. And then they sort of cheer up and sort of, we've still got some job to do. So that's one thing that can happen. But I would say that in many instances, people do change their mind if they, over a period, look at the data. And especially if they do it in a fairly unemotional way. If you just sort of, you give them the paper, the data, and sort of just look at that and just read that, and without any kind of anything that would threaten them more on an emotional level when it comes to where they go with that data. I'm from Sweden, so we have plenty of social democrats and plenty of sophisticated social democrats as well. And yes, that's one of the things they are saying. They're beginning to come around to the point of view that things are improving in the world, but that's probably because the government has done a lot of things when it comes to education and healthcare and so on. Well, the only answer to that is that, yeah, that's often part of the mix in lots of places around the world. But you know what happens when the government doesn't do that? People do that themselves, because the first thing that parents want to do when they don't need their children's work to sustain the family is that they want to invest in their education. And they often send them, even if there are public schools, they send them to private schools often and go from school to find the best school for their kids, because it's their future. So basically I would say that when politicians take these extra resources in tax money and spend them on things like education and healthcare, they're only doing that as because they're responsive to what people would want to do with those resources. When people get an extra euro around the world, they want to spend an extra 1.5 euros on healthcare. So it's basically driven from the grassroots level and from people, and then sometimes the government acts in the same way.
Yes, thank you. My question is about your chart. Why poverty is decreasing faster than hunger? What it means? The people cannot buy food, the food is not available. It's not true. We have a surplus of food and the trading is available everywhere. What is the reason, according to you?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it looks very strange and counterintuitive. But one of the simple reasons is that hunger had already declined more than extreme poverty. So it was already fewer who lived in chronic undernourishment than were poor. So you can then decrease poverty quite dramatically without seeing much of a bump when it comes to the poorest who live in chronic undernourishment. But it seems to continue right now as well. And one of the reasons is that, yeah, you can have enough to eat, but you still don't get quite the nutrients that you need for a healthy lifestyle. Chronic undernourishment it's not the same as starving. I mean, when it comes to famines and starvation, that has declined much more than chronic undernourishment. We heard the United Nations talking about what is going on in Africa right now as the hunger that's taking place in Yemen, for example, as the greatest humanitarian disaster that the UN has ever faced. And that's absolute nonsense. But they say that every time they have a summit and want some attention to what they're doing and want extra funds. Because when it comes to famines, the great famines, we almost don't see that at all in the world anymore. It used to be, in the early 20th century, 15 to 20 million people dying every decade in famines, despite the fact that the world population was so much smaller back then. Now, in awful years, we have a couple of tens of thousands doing the same. So that, I would say, explains the basic thing. You can have enough to eat, but still don't get the nutrients that you need to live a very healthy and a very long life, according to the data.
We have one more, I think, or tenim una més? Si hi ha alguna pregunta més? Sí? Doncs fem aquesta última pregunta al senyor d'aquí davant.
Well, thank you for your presentation. I would like to go to the chart, chart, well, not anymore, the one was there. There were four factors, I remember, no? Life expectancy, illiteracy, hunger, okay. child mortality.
Oh,
but yes, I think that when so many people in the world came out of the poverty, of course, these people, millions of people, come into the consume. No? They consume much more, and so this consume is less raw materials available. But at the same time, the quality of food having to feed so many people, the quality is decreasing. The industrialization for so many products for so many people is many more heavy metals, for example, in the seas, mercury, lead, etc. This should be another figure for this topic, no? I find that it lacks this because, in my opinion, of course, I mean that not only you have put here the positive things that, of course, are positive.
Yeah, I cheated a bit.
But this aspect should to be taken into account. In my opinion.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I chose these partly because I think that they are central indicators of human well-being. But also obviously because they're easy to measure. There are things that are much more difficult to really get a hold of, and one of them is environmental degradation in various ways. And if we had a graph on the chart on the plastic in the oceans, for example, that wouldn't look as optimistic. And I have a chapter on the environment in the book, and it's difficult to compose one index out of it because there are so many different indicators when it comes to, if you try to do that, though, there is an environmental performance index from certain American universities who compose this every second year, I think, and it shows that out of, these are not the exact numbers, but something like this, out of 150 countries, 130 are measuring improvements overall when it comes to environmental health. But that's because we forget the environmental problems that we solve, and then we worry about the next ones. I mean, it used to be that the rivers and the lakes and the forests in Europe were awful. Now the forests are growing. Now the River Thames, that was in London, that was declared biologically dead in 1950s, is teeming with life and fish. And even the short-nosed seahorse is back in the Thames, which is a great sign because it's very affected by pollution. If it's there, it means that there's something good about it. Actually, the biologists who found it, they kept it a secret because they're so cute, the seahorses, so people want to steal them if they find them. But those problems, we tend to forget that we solve them. It used to be that people died because we didn't have electricity and natural gas stoves in Europe. So then we burned wood and coal back home. And thousands of people died from this every week. But now we forgot about the fact that we solved this problem. And in a way, that's human nature. It's a good thing. We concentrate instead on global warming, the fact that we have fewer fish in the sea, the fact that we've got a problem with plastics in the ocean and so on, because those are the problems that we have to deal with now. The reason why I'm an optimist when it comes to that as well is that we see that we have turned the corner when it comes to many things, because the richest countries are solving problems like that. The most polluted cities are not sort of Barcelona and London anymore. It's New Delhi and Beijing. And when it comes to plastic in the oceans, 95% of all the plastics come from 10 rivers, and they're all in the poorest countries. So wealth and human freedom generally also gives us the tools to deal with those problems. Well, that's not enough to solve it around the world just yet. But what do you do if those technologies are too expensive? Well, you want more technological development to have the green technologies come down even further in price, and you keep the markets open to them instead of imposing tariffs on solar panels, for example, like Trump just did. And you increase wealth so that people's purchasing power increase, so that they don't have to make the decision between the choice between sending their kids to school or think about the health of this river in the future. So I'm thinking that we are going in the right direction, even though there's a lot of hard work left when it comes to the environment, which is obviously a good message. We've got things to do, so we should cheer up.
Bueno, crec que ho podem deixar aquí ja, we may finish. Gràcies a tots per venir un altre cop i que podeu seguir venint als actes que fem a la secció i també al cicle que fa Catalans Lliures, que va una mica en línia en els temes que s'han parlat avui. O sigui que moltes gràcies i fins la propera.
Muchas gracias.
Gràcies.